Rain hammered the cab windows that night in Chicago. A stranger slid in beside me, breathless, apologizing. Our eyes met, and something inside me shifted completely. She said, "Wrong cab, but maybe the right night." I laughed, though my heart was suddenly racing. Neither of us gave the driver our real address. 6 months later, she vanished without a single word. What I didn't know then would break me open. My name is Mara Whitfield, 29. An occupational therapist living in Chicago, a city of guarded hearts and long winters, where I'd learned to keep mine locked tight. I never imagined a rainy Tuesday cab ride could unravel years of careful hiding, but Reese Sinclair walked into my life and refused to let me stay invisible. The cab had been mine first. Hailed outside my clinic after a double shift, my scrubs soaked through and my patience thinner than the umbrella I'd forgotten. She yanked the door open before I could protest, dripping and laughing, insisting the app had matched us both to the same driver by mistake. I should have been annoyed. Instead, I found myself scooting over, making room, watching rain slide down her cheekbones like she'd been carved from a storm. She introduced herself as Reese, a violinist who played weddings and funerals in equal measure, and asked what kind of week could make someone look that exhausted. I told her about Mrs. Alvarez, my 90-year-old patient relearning to hold a spoon, and Reese listened like my small victories actually mattered to her. When the cab reached her stop, she didn't get out. She asked for my number instead, scribbled on a receipt with shaking, rain-cold fingers. "In case the universe wants a rematch," she said. And I remember thinking I'd never wanted anything so badly and so suddenly in my life. I didn't text her for 2 days, terrified of what wanting a woman this much might mean for the careful life I'd built. She texted first. A photo of the same street corner, caption "Still raining. Still thinking about the physical therapist who saves elderly hands." We met for coffee on a Saturday morning, and she showed up in mismatched socks, apologizing for nothing, entirely comfortable inside her own skin. I envied that comfort more than I let on. My whole family had taught me that comfort was something you earned by hiding the right things. By the third coffee, we weren't talking about violin recitals or hand tendons anymore. We were talking about our mothers, our fears, the people we used to pretend to be. I remember thinking, dangerously, that I could fall for her, and being furious at myself for not having fallen already. Reese had a way of asking questions that cracked me open gently, never forcing, just patient enough that I eventually wanted to answer honestly. She told me she'd known she liked women since she was 15, standing in a church basement, watching a choir director's daughter and feeling the floor tilt. I admitted I still hadn't said the word out loud to anyone, not even to myself in the mirror at 3 in the morning. She didn't flinch. She just reached across the table and covered my hand with hers, warm and steady, like she'd wait as long as it took. We started seeing each other twice a week, then 4 times, our schedules bending around one another like vines finding the same fence. She played me a piece she'd written after her grandmother's funeral, and I cried in a diner booth over lukewarm coffee, unable to explain why. I explained anyway. It was the first time art had ever made me feel less alone in a body I was still learning to trust. My best friend Priya noticed the change in me before I said anything, teasing that I smiled at my phone like a teenager with a crush. I finally told her about Reese over wine, watching her face for judgment and finding only relief, like she'd been waiting years for this confession. "Took you long enough," Priya said, and I realized she'd known before I had, which somehow made the admission easier to carry. Reese took me to hear her play at a small chapel downtown, and watching her hands move across the strings felt like watching someone tell the truth. Afterward, in the parking lot under a busted streetlight, she kissed me first, soft and questioning, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't pull away. I kissed her back like I'd been rehearsing it my whole life without knowing the choreography existed. That night I drove home with the windows down, laughing alone in my car, feeling 29 years old for the very first time. I hadn't told my mother anything about my personal life since college. I decided, foolishly, that Reese might be worth breaking that silence for. Reese, meanwhile, had already come out to her parents years earlier, and she couldn't fully understand why I still flinched at the idea of my mother's face. "She's not going to disown you for being happy," Reese said one night, and I wanted so badly to believe her that it scared me. My mother, Diane Whitfield, had spent my entire childhood planning a wedding I never asked for, complete with a groom named Tyler she still mentioned at every holiday. Tyler and I had dated in college, briefly, kindly, and disastrously, before I understood why kissing him had always felt like reading from a script. My mother still texted me his mother's Facebook updates, convinced that timing alone was keeping us apart instead of the truth I hadn't spoken. I let Reese meet Priya first, testing the waters in a smaller pond before risking the ocean of my family's expectations. Priya adored her instantly, declaring over brunch that Reese was annoyingly perfect, the kind of compliment that meant she was already planning our future. For 3 golden months, Reese and I built a private world. Sunday farmers markets, late-night diner fries, her apartment smelling like rosin and cardamom tea. I started leaving a toothbrush at her place. She started leaving her violin case in my hallway. Neither of us mentioned what that meant out loud. Then, on a Thursday in October, my boss called me into her office, and my entire understanding of my private world quietly began to crack. "Dear Naomi Sinclair, head of rehabilitation services, wanted to discuss a promotion, a corner office, and a family dinner she was hosting that weekend. You should come," she said. "My daughter's coming too. She's a musician. Very stubborn. Very much like you." Actually, I froze in that office chair, certain I'd misheard, certain the universe wasn't cruel enough to hand me this particular coincidence. That night I asked Reese, carefully, if her mother happened to run a rehabilitation clinic on the north side, and watched the color drain from her face. "You work for my mom," Reese whispered, and for a long moment neither of us said anything else, the silence heavier than the rain that started us. We agreed, foolishly, to keep our relationship quiet at that dinner, telling ourselves it was practical, not realizing we were rehearsing a much larger kind of hiding. Sitting across from Dr. Sinclair, passing mashed potatoes to the woman I loved while pretending we were strangers, felt like swallowing glass with a smile. Afterward, in the car, Reese apologized for her mother's obliviousness, but I could hear something else underneath it, relief that we hadn't been caught, and shame at that relief. "I don't want to be a secret," I told her, quieter than I meant to, and she nodded like she'd been waiting for me to say it first. "You're not," she said, "but I also can't lose my mother's respect at work for you. Not until you're ready for your own mother to know." The fairness of that stung more than any argument could have. I realized I'd been asking her to be brave in a house I hadn't opened yet. Promised her, and myself, that I would tell my mother before the year ended. A deadline I set out of love and immediately began to dread. Thanksgiving arrived faster than I wanted. My mother set 2 extra plates, one for Tyler, one for a hope I had never given her permission to hold. Reese offered to come with me, framed carefully as "your coworker's daughter," dropping off leftovers, a lie so thin it embarrassed us both. I refused. I couldn't watch my mother be kind to Reese while believing she was nothing more than a friend passing through. That refusal became our first real fight. Not loud, but cold. The kind where every word is measured like it might cost something. "You're ashamed," Reese said, and I hated that she wasn't entirely wrong. Hated it enough that I didn't correct her. We didn't speak for 4 days. I spent them replaying every argument, every excuse, every reason my mother's approval still mattered more than it should. On the 5th day, Reese showed up at my apartment with soup and no explanation, and I let her in because I was too tired to keep proving points. I'm not asking you to be fearless, she said, sitting on my kitchen floor. I'm asking you to let me stand next to you while you're scared. That sentence undid something in me I'd been holding together with willpower alone. I cried into her shoulder until the soup went cold. We didn't solve everything that night, but we decided to try again. Slower this time. Honest about the parts that still terrified us both. I started small, telling my father first. Over the phone. On a Tuesday when my mother was at book club and couldn't overhear. My father was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Does she treat you well?" And when I said yes, he said that was the only thing that mattered. "Your mother will come around," he added, though his voice carried more hope than certainty. And I chose to believe the hope. Emboldened, I invited Reese to my father's 60th birthday party, introducing her honestly this time, watching my father shake her hand without hesitation. My mother arrived late, took one look at how Reese's hand rested on the small of my back, and excused herself to the kitchen without a word. I followed her in, my heart pounding, and found her gripping the counter like she needed it to stay standing. "How long?" she asked, not turning around. And I told her the truth. 8 months. The best 8 months of my life. "You could have told me," she said. And I said I was trying to. Right now. She just turned around and looked at me. She didn't turn around. She asked me to take Reese home early. And I did. Humiliated and furious in equal measure. The party continuing without either of us. Reese didn't say much in the car. She just held my hand at every red light, letting me be angry without needing to fix it. My mother called the next morning. Not to apologize, but to ask if this was a phase brought on by stress. A question that gutted me more than silence would have. I told her it wasn't a phase. That I had known some version of this truth since I was 16 and too afraid to name it. She said she needed time. I said I'd given her 29 years of time already, and hung up before my voice could break completely. Reese found me on my bathroom floor an hour later, and instead of platitudes, she just sat down beside me and matched my breathing until it slowed. "My father took 2 years, she offered quietly. "He came around eventually. Some people just need longer roads than others. I didn't want a long road. I wanted my mother at Christmas, unbothered. The way she'd always been before I became a complication to her. Work became its own quiet minefield. Dear. Sinclair started asking pointed questions about why Reese had suddenly stopped mentioning her personal life at family dinners. Reese confessed to her mother on a Sunday afternoon. Alone. Wanting to protect me from watching another parent's face rearrange itself around disappointment. Dear. Sinclair's reaction was gentler than mine. Surprise, a few careful questions, and finally, "I just want you to be careful with each other, professionally and otherwise. At work." Dear. Sinclair began treating me exactly the same, which felt like both a relief and a strange kind of grief for the intimacy I'd lost with my own mother. Christmas came without an invitation from my mother. The first time in 29 years I hadn't been asked to set the table. I spent it with Reese's family instead. In Ohio. Surrounded by a warmth I hadn't realized I'd been starving for my entire life. Reese's grandmother pulled me aside during dinner and told me a story about Reese's late aunt, a woman the family rarely mentioned. "She loved a woman too," the grandmother said. "Back when that could get you fired. Or worse. She never got to be as brave as you two are being." Reese hadn't known the full story either, and hearing it together, hand in hand at her grandmother's table, felt like inheriting a kind of courage. That night, back at Reese's childhood home, she showed me an old photograph of her aunt and a woman named Delphine. Faces close. Eyes unmistakably in love. "She kept this hidden in a hymnal for 40 years, Reese said. "I found it after she died. I never told anyone what it meant. I understood." Suddenly, why Reese had always seemed so certain about living openly. She was living the life her aunt never got the chance to. That certainty had felt like pressure before. That night, it felt like a gift she was quietly, generously, trying to hand me too. We returned to Chicago in January with something steadier between us, even as the space at my mother's table stayed empty and unresolved. Priya threw a small dinner to celebrate our 6-month anniversary, and for the first time, I let myself introduce Reese as my girlfriend without flinching. My father started calling me every Sunday, careful never to mention Reese by name but always asking, gently, "How's your life going? Really?" I told him the truth each time, small honest pieces, trusting that he'd carry them quietly to my mother when the moment was right. At work, a promotion opened up in the rehabilitation department's satellite office in Milwaukee, and my supervisor encouraged me to apply, citing my strong outcomes. The role would mean relocating within 4 months, leaving Chicago, leaving Priya, and leaving the fragile beginnings of whatever might still happen with my mother. It would also mean leaving Reese, whose orchestra contract and entire musical community were rooted firmly in Chicago's tightly woven world. I didn't apply right away. I sat with the decision the way Reese had taught me to sit with hard feelings instead of running from them. Reese noticed the job posting on my laptop screen one evening and asked, carefully, whether I was considering it, her voice deliberately neutral. "I don't know," I admitted. "It's a good opportunity. But I also don't want a career that costs me you." "Don't decide based on me," she said, though something in her eyes suggested she desperately hoped I would decide based on her anyway. That contradiction between her words and her eyes became its own quiet argument, one neither of us was ready to have honestly. I applied anyway, telling myself it was just an application, not a decision. A lie I repeated until it almost felt true. 3 weeks later, I got the interview, and the reality of a possible future without daily access to Reese became suddenly, uncomfortably concrete. We fought about it properly this time. Voices raised. Old fears resurfacing about who was allowed to want things and who was expected to sacrifice them. "You ran toward comfort your whole life," Reese said. "Don't run toward ambition now just because it's easier than staying and fighting for us." "That's unfair," I said, though later, alone, I wondered if it was unfair only because it was uncomfortably close to true. We didn't speak for a week, the longest silence since we'd met, and I hated how normal that silence had started to feel. During that week, my mother finally called, not to apologize, but to ask if I would come to her sister's wedding as just my daughter, no labels required. I went, cautiously hopeful, only to find Tyler seated beside me at the reception table. My mother's optimism dressed up as coincidence. "He asked about you," she whispered during the toast, and I realized she hadn't budged an inch, only repackaged the same old expectation. I left the reception early, sitting alone in my car in the parking lot, finally admitting to myself how exhausted I was from managing everyone else's comfort. I called Reese from that parking lot, voice shaking, and told her I was done shrinking myself for people who refused to see me clearly. She drove 40 minutes in the rain to meet me there, and we sat in my car together, saying nothing, just breathing the same air until I calmed down. "I don't want Milwaukee if it means losing this," I said finally, gesturing at the space between us, small and steady and real. "I don't want you to lose yourself for me either," she said. "Let's figure out the real answer together, not out of fear." We spent the following weeks actually talking, mapping out what a long-distance year might look like, what sacrifices felt fair versus resentful. Reese admitted she'd been offered a touring position with a smaller ensemble months earlier, and had quietly turned it down without telling me. "Why didn't you say anything?" asked. "Done." And she admitted she'd been scared that admitting her own dreams might make mine feel smaller. That confession cracked something open between us. We'd both been sacrificing silently, assuming silence was love instead of just another kind of hiding. We agreed, together this time, that I would withdraw from the Milwaukee interview, not out of obligation, But because Chicago held too much, we weren't ready to abandon. My supervisor was disappointed but understanding. And strangely, the decision left me lighter than the promotion ever could have. Reese, in turn, reconsidered the touring offer, negotiating a shorter regional schedule that let her chase her own ambitions without disappearing from our life together. For the first time, our compromise felt mutual instead of sacrificial, built from honesty instead of quiet resentment stacking up unspoken. My mother, hearing through my father that I'd turned down a promotion, assumed it was because of Reese, and used it as fresh ammunition. "You're throwing away your career for this," she said on the phone. And I finally, calmly, told her the decision had nothing to do with her approval. "I'm not asking you to understand my relationship," I said. "I'm asking you to stop pretending my life is a mistake you get to correct." She hung up without responding. And for the first time, the silence afterward didn't feel like defeat, only like a boundary finally drawn. Weeks passed without contact. I grieved the version of my mother I'd hoped for while slowly building a family of choice around Reese, Priya, and her parents. Reese's mother, dear Sinclair, quietly began inviting me to family gatherings separate from work, treating me less like an employee and more like her daughter's partner. At one such dinner, dear Sinclair mentioned offhandedly that a senior therapist position was opening, one that wouldn't require relocation, and asked if I'd consider it. I accepted eventually, grateful for a path forward that didn't force me to choose between career growth and the life I'd built with Reese. Spring arrived, and with it, an unexpected knock on my apartment door. My father, alone, holding a grocery bag full of my childhood favorite snacks. "Your mother doesn't know I'm here," he admitted, sitting at my kitchen table. "I just wanted to see how you're really doing." Without an audience, I told him everything, unfiltered, and watched something in his posture soften with every honest word, like relief finally had somewhere to land. "I should have pushed her sooner," he said. "I let her set the rules in that house for too many years. I'm sorry for that." His apology, imperfect and overdue, meant more to me than 100 perfect ones could have, simply because it was finally honest. He asked to meet Reese properly, not as a secret or a coincidence, but as someone he wanted to know for his daughter's sake. I introduced them over dinner the following week, and watched my father ask Reese thoughtful questions about her music, genuinely curious, entirely unguarded. "She's good for you," he told me afterward in the doorway. "I can see it. I just wish I'd said that sooner." That small sentence became a foothold, proof that not every door in my family was permanently closed, even if some still were. Reese's touring schedule picked up that summer. 3 weekends a month spent in cities I couldn't always join her in, testing our new balance. I missed her more than I expected to, learning that love wasn't just the easy parts, but also the discipline of trusting someone across distance. During one of her longer trips, an old friend of Reese's, a cellist named Whitney, began texting her constantly, and jealousy crept into me uninvited. I didn't say anything at first, ashamed of feeling insecure, until the silence between us started to feel eerily like the hiding we'd promised to leave behind. Finally I asked her, directly, about Whitney, and Reese's face shifted into something between surprise and guilt, which did nothing to calm my nerves. "Whitney and I dated years ago," she admitted, "before I met you. She's been going through a divorce and leaning on me more than I should have allowed." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not quite betrayal, but the sharp edge of realizing there were parts of Reese's past I hadn't fully seen. "I should have told you when the texting started," she said. "I didn't want to make it a bigger deal than it was. That was wrong of me." We argued. Honestly this time. No silent treatment. Just two people insisting on being heard until the anger burned down into something clearer. Reese set a boundary with Whitney that night. In front of me. choosing transparency over comfort for the first time in that particular friendship. It didn't erase the sting completely, but it rebuilt something between us, proof that when tested, she chose honesty over the easier, quieter lie. Summer folded into fall, and my mother, unexpectedly, sent a birthday card. No mention of Reese, but no mention of Tyler either. Just a small crack of neutrality. I took it as progress, however small, and sent a thank you text that opened, cautiously, the thinnest possible line of communication between us. Then, in October, almost exactly a year after that first rainy cab ride, Reese's father called with news that stopped both our lives cold. Her father had been diagnosed with early-stage pancreatic cancer, the kind of diagnosis that rearranges every future plan into something smaller and more urgent. Reese flew home to Ohio immediately, and I followed 2 days later, unwilling to let distance be the thing that separated us during something this heavy. Her family welcomed me without hesitation this time, folding me into hospital waiting rooms and late-night casserole dinners like I'd always belonged there. Reese grew quieter during those weeks, carrying grief the way she carried difficult music, internally, precisely, refusing to let anyone see the effort it took. One night, exhausted in a hospital hallway, she finally broke, sobbing into my shoulder, admitting she was terrified of losing her father before he truly knew her. "He knows you," I told her. "He's known you your whole life. This isn't about time running out. It's about fear making you doubt what's already true." Her father's surgery, when it finally came, was successful, though recovery would be long, slow, and uncertain in the months ahead. In the recovery room, weak but lucid, he reached for Reese's hand first, then mine, holding both like he wanted us anchored together beside him. "Don't waste time," he told us, voice raspy but clear. "I spent too many years assuming there'd always be more of it. There isn't." Those words settled into both of us differently than any argument or fear ever had, sharpening our sense of what actually mattered. Back in Chicago, Reese suggested we move in together, no longer content with toothbrushes and violin cases scattered between 2 separate addresses. I said yes before she finished the sentence, surprising us both with how uncomplicated the decision suddenly felt after everything we'd survived. We found a small apartment near the lake, with enough space for her music stand and my endless collection of physical therapy textbooks. Moving day was chaotic and joyful. Priya arguing with movers over boxes labeled wrong, Reese's mother bringing homemade lasagna without being asked. My father helped too, carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs, quietly proud in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be in months. My mother wasn't there. I noticed her absence the way you notice a missing tooth. Constantly, with your tongue, even when you're trying not to. That night, unpacking boxes in our new living room, Reese found the old receipt from our first cab ride, saved carefully in a drawer of mine. "You kept this?" she asked, laughing. And I admitted I'd kept it since that very first week, too embarrassed at the time to tell her. "I think I knew that night," I said. "I just needed a year and a half to catch up to what I already felt." She kissed me then, slow and certain, in the middle of unpacked boxes, and I understood that home wasn't an address. It was this exact feeling. Winter arrived again, and with it, an invitation I never expected. My mother, asking if she could come for coffee. Just the 2 of us. No agenda stated. I agreed, cautiously, meeting her at a small cafe near my old apartment, bracing myself for another round of the same tired arguments. Instead, she slid a folded photograph across the table, herself at 19, standing close to a woman I didn't recognize, both smiling in a way I'd never seen. "Her name was Carol," my mother said quietly. "We were close. Once. In ways I never let myself examine too closely." I sat frozen, coffee cooling, as my mother explained a life she'd buried decades ago beneath marriage, motherhood, and a version of normal she'd chosen out of fear. I didn't fight for it, she admitted. I told myself I didn't feel what I felt. Watching you be brave has forced me to stop lying to myself. Her confession didn't erase the year of silence between us, but it reframed it entirely, turning judgment into something closer to grief and self-recognition. I wasn't disowning you, she said. I was terrified of everything I saw in you that I never let myself become. I reached across the table and took her hand, the same way Reese had once taken mine in a rain-soaked cab, patient and unwavering. I need time to actually know Reese, she said. Not perform politeness at her, but really know her. The way I never let myself know Carol. I told her that was more than I'd let myself hope for in months, and for the first time in a year, we hugged without tension between us. Slowly, over the following weeks, my mother started asking real questions about Reese, her music, her family, the small details that build actual understanding. She invited us both to Sunday dinner, nervous and formal at first, but by dessert, laughing genuinely at one of Reese's stories about her grandmother. It wasn't a fully healed relationship overnight, but it was a door reopening, hinge by rusty hinge, after a year of being sealed shut. In the spring, Reese was offered a permanent position with a respected Chicago ensemble. No more constant touring. No more distance to manage between us. We celebrated at the same chapel where she'd first played for me, standing in the same spot where she'd kissed me under a broken streetlight. Reese got quiet that evening, unusually nervous, fidgeting with something in her coat pocket that she kept almost, then not, pulling out. I've been carrying this for 2 months, she finally admitted, opening her palm to reveal a small ring. Simple, unmistakable in its meaning. I'm not asking because we need to rush, she said. I'm asking because I've never wanted to build a life with anyone the way I want this with you. I said yes before she finished speaking, the same way I had about the apartment, certain in a way that surprised even me. We told our families separately, watching 2 very different reactions unfold. Reese's parents overjoyed instantly, mine cautiously, tearfully, but genuinely happy. My mother cried. Not from grief this time, but from something closer to pride mixed with regret for the years she'd almost missed. I want to help plan, she said. If you'll let me. I missed enough already. I don't want to miss this too. I let her. Carefully. Watching her learn to celebrate a version of my life she'd once refused to imagine existing. We planned a small wedding for early autumn, in a garden near the lake, close enough to hear the water on quiet mornings. Priya stood as my maid of honor, teasing that she'd known this outcome since that first wine-soaked confession years earlier. Reese's grandmother, frail but present, asked to hold the old photograph of her sister and Delphine during the ceremony, honoring a love that never got its chance. She'd be so proud, Reese whispered to me before the ceremony began, that we get to do what she never could. My father walked me down the aisle, steady despite his shaking hands, whispering that he'd never been prouder of any decision I'd made. My mother sat in the front row beside him, holding a tissue she didn't bother hiding, watching me marry a woman she'd learned, finally, to truly see. Reese's vows spoke of rainy cabs and stubborn silences, of choosing honesty even when it terrified us, of building a home out of small daily bravery. My vows spoke of learning to stop apologizing for who I was, of a mother's slow return, and of a love patient enough to wait for me to catch up. We exchanged rings under a sky that threatened rain but never delivered, as if the universe had decided we'd earned one dry, unclouded day. Afterward, dancing barefoot on the grass, I caught my mother watching us, not with worry this time, but with something that finally looked like peace. Somewhere between the cab ride and the garden, I had stopped hiding pieces of myself and started building a life that fit every single one of them. Reese pulled me close during the last song and whispered that she'd marked our anniversary the day we shared that cab, not the day we married. I whispered back that I finally understood what her father meant about not wasting time, because every year with her had felt fuller than the one before. We stayed on that dance floor long after the music ended, unwilling to let go of a night that felt like the truest beginning we'd ever had. Fendi.